What's up guys, it's Jxey, and in today's video, I want to get right into it. Your 20s are about freedom, right? Living your best life, traveling, financing things you can't afford, ignoring your health, and telling yourself that you'll sort it all out later, don't worry about it. And look, none of this feels like ruining your life at the time, and that's the problem we're going to discuss in today's video. Because the truth is, nobody really wakes up one day in their 20s and plans to ruin their life. It's the small choices that you make every day, the ones that feel harmless in the moment, that quietly stack up until one day you look around and you realise you're not where you thought you would be. And I know that because as a young man in my 20s, I've already made more than a few of these myself, and I've seen it happen to some of my closest friends. So today, I want to talk about the myth of rock bottom, the quiet patterns that actually mess people up in their 20s, why it feels so harmless at the time, and how to stop drifting before it costs you years. So let's get right into it. The myth of rock bottom. And stick with me here, because this is a part that most people get wrong, and it explains almost everything that comes next. Growing up, I thought that lives only fall apart at rock bottom. It was always framed, it's got to be a big breakdown, a big failure, or a dramatic moment where everything collapses. That's how it's shown in films, online, everywhere. So naturally you think, if my life doesn't look like that, then I must be fine. But that's not usually how it happens. Real damage happens long before crisis. It's staying in situations you know aren't right because they feel familiar, or it's bad habits becoming part of your routine instead of something temporary. It's telling yourself that you'll take things seriously soon. For me, one of those was nicotine. It didn't feel dangerous, it didn't feel destructive, it felt like a stress reliever, something small. At the time I was in a relationship that was draining me emotionally, but because I was still functioning, still working, still paying bills, I told myself everything was fine. Nothing was on fire, but the direction was already wrong. And when I'm honest, I wasn't building anything with my life. I hadn't met my girlfriend yet who I'm with now. I wasn't growing. I was too busy longing instead of actually fixing what wasn't going right. And if you're watching this video now feeling the same way I did, you'll know from experience that this wouldn't have come from big huge mistakes in my life. They were small daily patterns that compounded themselves over time. And the real issue here guys is that they don't feel dangerous at the time, because they're socially accepted, which makes them so much harder to spot. So for pattern number 1, money and lifestyle. Now, if you're new here, let me give you some background. I grew up with a tight-knit group of friends, and as we grew up, finished school and got jobs, we slowly grew apart. But I'd still hear from them from time to time and see the odd posts online. And one of the first things I noticed was their money, their lifestyles and their spending habits. I'm quite fortunate to have been brought up to be safe with money and not blast my first paycheck. But some of my friends weren't as lucky to get taught how to properly deal with adult money. And the thing is, it's not even like my mates were spending in dramatic ways. They weren't broke or reckless, but they also weren't building anything, and that's the real issue. I remember a few years back now, I'd met up with a couple of my old mates for some drinks, and one of them had just started financing a new Merc, and he was talking about how high his insurance and his finance payments were, saying his money would come in and just disappear out his bank. And I was just so shocked at the way he'd convinced himself that he'd sort it all out later when he earns more money. He told himself that he was fine because his bills were paid, but there was no emergency fund being built up in the background, no real savings, no buffer. Now sure, at 17, 18, it doesn't really seem all that big a deal, but the issue is you tell yourself you'll sort it out later, and later turns into years. Because when your income goes up, your lifestyle usually follows it. And that, my friends, is a rat race many people are in. It's been 3 years since that conversation, and now that same friend of mine has started financing an even more expensive car, holidays, stuff he can technically afford month to month, whether it's on Klarna or whatnot, but that's only if nothing ever goes wrong. And as my friends and I are approaching our early to mid 20s, that's where we're at the age where money stops being freedom and starts becoming pressure. That new promotion at work doesn't make you feel successful, because you already feel so boxed in your rat race lifestyle. And for you guys watching in this exact situation, I bet if you look back, you'd realise a lot of that spending isn't even about what you actually want. Ultimately, it's all about keeping up, looking like you're doing well and feeling like you're not falling behind. But no one tells us this. No one tells us how exhausting it is to maintain a finance lifestyle we haven't actually earned yet. Every paycheck is already allocated. Every decision feels tighter. You're working hard, tirelessly, but you're not actually moving forward. And that's when stress creeps in quietly. And just like with money, this same "I'll figure it out later" mindset shows up in education too, which is pattern 2, education without intention. When I finished school, I didn't have everything figured out. I didn't have some clear blueprint for my life. I just knew I needed to move forward from school and education. So I did what felt sensible for me at the time. I became a mechanic apprentice. And to be clear, there's nothing wrong with that. I learned discipline, how to work, and what earning money actually felt like. But if I'm honest, for long term, I didn't really know where it was going to take me. I wasn't working towards a long-term plan, I was just busy. And busy felt productive and it felt safe. That's the real trap here. Because when you don't know what you want yet, it's easy to commit to something without ever asking yourself whether it's aligned with where you want to end up. I remember having moments, usually late at night, when I'd ask myself, is this really it? Is this where I'm heading for the next 30 to 40 years? And I didn't have an answer. And that's when I realized something important. Moving forward without direction isn't the same as making progress. And this isn't just a trades thing either. It's the same pattern I saw with a lot of people I grew up with who went to university. Not because they had a clear plan, not because they knew what their degree would lead to, but because it felt safer than standing still. And definitely safer than questioning the path everyone else was on. Basic human psychology studies show that people do prefer to take action than inaction. And I'm not against going to university whatsoever. If you go there to build a specific high value skill, something that clearly moves you closer to the life you want, then it can be an incredible decision. But when education or work becomes a way to avoid clarity, that's where the quiet damage starts. I had to make a hard call and change direction, leaving something familiar, something I'd already invested a lot of time into, and it wasn't easy. But staying on a path just because I'd already started on it would have cost me years. And I've watched some of my closest friends come out of uni in a similar place, debt, uncertainty, and no clearer sense of direction than when they began. The dangerous part isn't choosing the wrong path, it's never stopping to ask what the path is actually for. At some point you have to ask yourself, is this building towards something or just helping me avoid choosing? Because your 20s aren't neutral years, they're the years where direction compounds. And if you don't choose one deliberately, life will choose one for you. If there's one thing in my late teens and early 20s I've managed to do well at, it's maximizing the low responsibility years of living at home. So for the third pattern that quietly messes people up in their 20s, it's going to be squandering those low responsibility years. This is another thing I see my friends and people online not appreciating enough. It can be such a costly mistake not realizing early on how valuable your low responsibility years actually are. As a homeowner at the age of 20, I can say that living at home gets such a bad reputation. It's one of the sole reasons why I was able to build my wealth on such a low wage, starting out as a mechanic apprentice on just £6 an hour. I mean, you literally have everything at your fingertips. Low bills, low pressure, these are massive advantages if you use them properly and maximize the opportunity. When I first started my apprenticeship as a mechanic, I was of course still living at home. But I saw the next few years ahead of me as a real opportunity to save, to learn, and to take a few risks without ever really falling apart. For me to move out at 20, I had to say no a lot of times to going out with my mates, had to live really cheaply, pretty much like I was really broke. I remember I'd received my pay slip, I'd pay my car insurance, I'd pay my road tax and my fuel, and that was it. Everything else in a month I'd put away. I barely spent a penny on myself. Again, it wasn't easy, but nothing ever is. In honesty, my late teens were years of sacrifice and years setting myself up for my early 20s. And at times I did have nights where I'd question what I was doing because none of my friends were doing the same things. And I'd say that whether you're in your teens, early or even late 20s watching this now, if you haven't started yet, then don't panic. It's never too late to start living really cheaply and saving as much as possible so you can achieve those goals of being a homeowner, getting married and building a family. It's not impossible. And now I get it's quite ironic, but from my time working as a mechanic and now an accountant, I've met so many different people who've all rushed independence just to say they've moved out, and end up stressing out, renting and watching their money go really nowhere every month. And that can be the sneaky trap sometimes. Just because something looks grown up doesn't mean it's automatically freeing. So just think back to that first pattern we mentioned, and make sure that before you commit to something financially, that it's definitely the right thing for you long term. And that it's not just satisfying one of your short-term needs. But not all damage is financial, and one of the biggest things that held my friends and I back throughout our late teens and early 20s had nothing to do with money. So for the fourth pattern that quietly messes people up in their 20s, it's got to be relationships and being in with the wrong crowd. I got into my first serious relationship when I was just 16, and like all, it started off great and fine on the surface, but adolescent lies and dramas built up over time, and underneath, it told a very different story. By the time I'd started full-time work, I was already fully consumed by the relationship, and it was taking such a toll on my mental health, which directly affected my ability to work towards my professional goals. It fully drained me without me even realizing it. I was just starting out my working life, but instead of being focused and building momentum, I was constantly stressed, distracted, and emotionally drained. It affected my mood, I couldn't work as hard, I was tired every evening, from constant arguments and callings out. So much to the point where I'd find it difficult to grab a few drinks with my friends in an evening. I stopped enjoying the simple things in life. And the thing is, you don't notice how heavy this all is until you're finally out of it. I guess the biggest lesson I've had to learn is the wrong relationship doesn't just cost you time, it slowly takes pieces of you bit by bit. And the same goes for the people you surround yourself with. With a lot of my friends going off to uni and making new friends from all over, I've seen them find themselves in environments that normalise bad habits, negativity, and constant partying and mocking ambition. And because they were in these environments surrounded by this energy, that has become their baseline. And for them and people like yourself watching, it's not because you're weak or anything of the sorts. We as people adapt to the circumstances we're in, and that's only human. But it can be so hard to build a future you want when the people around you don't respect the idea of building anything at all. As I said beforehand, I started working early at just 16, while my closest friends were out partying. I wasn't. And at that time, it genuinely felt like I was missing out. But looking back now, I see it so much more differently. I was never actually missing out. I was just sticking to my guns and choosing something that felt right for me. And don't get me wrong, your 20s aren't about being boring or never enjoying life. Rather, they're about deciding whether it's worth sacrificing short-term comfort for long-term peace. And if you choose that path of short-term comfort, this kind of life starts showing up in your body, which leads me to my fifth and final pattern: neglecting your health. For me, health was another thing that I ignored for way too long, especially with smoke and nicotine. The issue is with addictions such as my old one, it never starts as a big problem, it starts as a stress reliever. The first time I ever smoked a cigarette, I was walking home from school and I was having relationship troubles, in that same relationship we spoke about earlier. And it was then when my friend offered me one as just something to cope with all the stress. And I just got hooked on the idea of taking my stresses out with it. You know how it is, you find a nice bench somewhere, a good smoking spot, and you chill out and put some music on, and it almost feels relaxing. It starts off as a small habit, a little part of your day where you can wind down. And then one day you realise it's just become a part of your life. I became dependent on it. I surrounded my days and whole routine around when I could next smoke. In the morning before the garage opened, throughout the day so I'd have more breaks, and then a cheeky one at night out the window. Without it, my energy was low, my focus was worse, and my stress was way higher, because I was relying so highly on smoking to level me out. And while I don't know for certain, I'm keeping my fingers crossed that I've gotten out before it's done serious damage to me. Because if there's one thing I know with this stuff, health doesn't just collapse suddenly, it falls off unnoticeably until it's already too late. So if you're watching this now in a similar position to what I was, I know you'd probably be saying, it's not that simple, it's not that easy. And in a lot of ways, you're right. I went cold turkey, and for some, that's not always the best way to go about things. But if I can guarantee you one thing, it's that only you can decide to quit, and only you can take the actions required from yourself. Nobody else can do it for you. So you've got to find your reason, your motivation, and stick to it. For me, my motivation was when I met my girlfriend, who I'm still with now. I knew I wanted to be with her for as long as possible. I didn't want my health to get in the way of our future. And that one goal gave me all the motivation I needed. So why do all these patterns we discussed so far feel so harmless? And it's because they all share the same danger. It's that the consequences are delayed. I never felt bad about neglecting my health when I was smoking. I told myself it was a future me problem and just enjoyed the moment. Told myself to worry about it later. And in that relationship, I didn't know it was draining me while I was in it. I only noticed once we stopped talking, and I finally had space to think. Once my energy, focus and direction had already taken a hit. And for my friends and the spenders financing lifestyles that their incomes don't represent, it'll be the same for them. They won't feel bad spending until years later when they come to want to put a deposit on a house. The trouble is, in your 20s the feedback is really slow. You can make mistakes and still feel okay afterwards. Your body recovers faster and your finances bounce back easier. And that's exactly why it's dangerous, because nothing warns you, nothing screams that you're off course. Everything feels fine until it isn't. And when it catches up, it does so all at once. If you want to get ahead in your 20s, the first move isn't grinding harder, it's noticing the patterns you're in before the bill finally arrives. So once you actually notice a pattern, how do you go about interrupting it? Because assuming everything is fine is a no-go. In your 20s, if you want to do better than most and get ahead, you've got a few things to learn. Firstly, you can't fix these patterns with pure motivation, it's just not that simple. It's not as easy as waking up one day and being in the mood for sorting your life out, because motivation will only take you so far, especially when it comes to managing your finances, your lifestyle, savings, all of that. What you need to fix it with is structure. And not the kind of I'll try harder structure, but rather the kind that I've had to adopt since I started my journey of moving out. From when I first started working, I got myself a structure in place so I could balance my finances month to month. Ensure I was planning ahead for the first car purchase, using my help to buy allowances for my first house, all of that. You've got to be organised with your money and make sure you know exactly the ins and outs you have each month. What worked for me was to save a set amount each month and then not try to overspend on myself throughout the month. And then at the end of it, I'd save whatever I had left over. And I know it sounds boring, but your future self will thank you for not buying a third pair of shoes in the last 6 months. Trust me. I had nights where I'd spend hours debating with myself whether to buy a nice new guitar. But each time I'd win the argument with myself. I like to think that you got 2 people in your head. One of them is you, the voice you hear in your head, and the other one is like a bad monkey telling you to give in to all your temptations, whether it's just to have one more drink, one more drag with a fag, or something as serious as buying that new car. If you can learn to pause and not always listen to that voice, especially with money, you're already halfway ahead. But that doesn't answer all of our other issues, such as toxic relationships and bad environments. And in honesty, deep down, if you're in a toxic relationship, you can often feel it in your gut that something's off. For me, I was completely blocking out that signal. I was so scared to be alone and having to start fresh with someone else that I didn't even want to consider breaking things off. But in the end, it turned out to be one of the best choices ever. My advice to you would be, if you've got that feeling deep down, but you're too afraid to act on it, then just take that jump and do it. Because a toxic relationship is only good for one thing, and that's keeping you down. You'll never be able to grow or get that family you want in 15 years time if you don't get out and start afresh. And the second most important thing to do is to not get back in touch after. The amount of times we went back and forth was unhealthy, and it benefited me in no way. I get that familiarity feels comfortable, but you've got to rip the bandage off or you'll never get over it. And the same applies to bad habits and environments, whether it's nicotine, social media, or being around the wrong people. The solution usually isn't dramatic. It's small changes repeated. For me, I quit nicotine cold turkey, but if I did it again, I'd probably taper, reduce it and detach it from my identity. And with social media, something as simple as screen timers can block that impulse long enough for you to choose something better. Even watching a film with family beats sitting alone doom scrolling. So we're coming to the end of the video now, guys, and if you've made it this far and can relate to even just one of these points, I just want to say by no means is your life ruined. I've been through some of these myself and have come out the other end. But direction does matter. Because your 20s don't fall apart in one moment. They drift off course quietly. So making sure that you point yourself in the best direction possible for success is so important. And if this video today helps you notice a pattern, then you've already interrupted it and made a start. So if you do relate, don't take that as a bad thing, as you've still got time and leverage to work with. But anyway guys, if you made it this far, then I really appreciate you and I really hope you enjoyed. Please let me know your thoughts down below as I genuinely respond to all of your guys' comments. Anyway guys, it's been Jxey, stay awesome.